everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It is pouring rain in Arlington today, so maybe you can see a little bit of it in the background, but unlike a lot of people, I actually really like rainy days. So Ryan and I had some tomato soup and focaccia bread for lunch. It was great. But on to our main topic today. So I talked about fitness trackers, I think the second week of my YouTube channel. So I talked about the research behind Apple Watches and my own experience with them. And today I want to bring it back because this week I read a super interesting research study on fitness trackers that I actually had not read before. I don't know how it got away from me, but I just found it. And I think it's really, really important and actually very applicable to everyone's life who wears a fitness tracker. So today I'm gonna go a little bit over the research. Don't worry, it won't be boring. I'll make it super interesting. And then I'll go into a little bit about how you can use this research to change your relationship with your fitness tracker. So let's dive right in. So I actually brought the research with me today. I've annotated all of it. So it's called The Hidden Cost of Personal Quantification. It's by Dr. Jordan Etkin, who is a tenured professor at Duke University in their School of Marketing. And she does a lot of research on motivation, especially intrinsic motivation as it comes to personal quantification. So she looks at sort of the benefits and detriments of quantifying our behavior. And what I really loved about her research is actually, so she did 6 different experiments to measure, to look at measurement, especially around quantifying behavior. And only 3 of those were about counting steps, so in relation to measuring our step count. But the other ones were looking at quantifying behavior in terms of reading. So she asked people to read something just for fun and then to read something and count how many pages they were reading. And when they counted how many pages they were reading, that decreased the amount of joy that they got out of that activity. So I'm gonna talk about it from the fitness tracker perspective today, but know that you can take this research into any part of your life that you're using to quantify your behavior. So the first big takeaway from this research is that measurement can, and I'm gonna emphasize can, increase the amount of something that you do. So her research found that when you measure how many steps you take, that increases the amount of steps that you will take. So when she had people wear pedometers, the ones who could see the amount of steps they were taking took more steps than the ones who were not wearing the pedometer. So her research found that it increased your output. Not all research has found that, but her experiments did find that it increased output. And then, so that was sort of her first main finding. But then from there, she found that in those same experiments, though output increased, enjoyment of the activity decreased. So people rated their enjoyment of those activities as less when they had to quantify their behavior, which is super, super interesting. So maybe think about your fitness tracker here for a second. Do your workouts where you measure your workout, are those less joyful or more joyful than when maybe you don't wear a fitness tracker? So that's our first thing. So decreased enjoyment was her first finding. The second finding was that it decreased people's subjective well-being. So when they were quantifying their behavior in comparison to those who were not quantifying their behavior, they had decreased subjective well-being. And then finally, her last finding was that measuring your behaviors led to decreased continued engagement. As a behavior change person, that one struck a huge chord with me because when we're talking about behavior change, I'm not talking about a week-long behavior change. We want long-term sustained positive behavior change. And if measuring your behavior actually decreases continued engagement, that is a huge deal. Think about how many things that we quantify every day that may actually lead us to not enjoy those behaviors and not continue them long-term. So those were the main findings from her research. So this goes back to our conversation about intrinsic motivation. So we talked about that a couple weeks ago. Go back and watch that video if you haven't already. So intrinsic motivation is when you perform a behavior for the inherent pleasure or joy of a behavior. Extrinsic motivation is when you perform a behavior for some an extrinsic reason. So That could be you're getting paid to do something, or you get a grade, so think about school. So some sort of extrinsic thing. It could even be like a deep feeling like anxiety or fear that is rooted in an activity. So when we're thinking about the self-determination theory, which is over intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, one of the key points here is autonomy. So feeling like you have choice in your behavior. So I think when we're thinking about measuring our behavior, at least when I was wearing my fitness tracker, I did not feel like I was closing my rings for me. I felt like I was doing it to satisfy my Apple Watch. And I think it's important here when you think about measuring your behavior and that decreasing your joy over time, where does that come from? And I think autonomy is a really, really important key thing here. So I think intrinsic motivation ties into that decreased enjoyment, that decreased subjective well-being, and that decreased continued engagement, because it's not coming from you. It's coming from this extrinsic motivator or reward system. Okay, so how can you take this research into your day-to-day life? So if you don't wear a fitness tracker, take a second and think about behaviors that you quantify. Think about it for a second. There are maybe lots of them that you haven't even thought about. Like, for example, I was realizing that I count how many books I read in a year. And I would like to point out, there's nothing inherently wrong in any of these, but think, does that take away the joy of the behavior for me? Or does it increase the joy? We're all different. We all have different motivators. That may be a huge positive motivator for you, or it may be getting in the way of you doing that behavior long term. So think about behaviors that you quantify maybe without even thinking about it. So if you don't wear a fitness tracker, let's start there. If you do, I think it's important to think about your relationship with your fitness tracker. Does it increase your joy or does it decrease it? Does it increase your subjective well-being or does it decrease it? These are all loaded questions, by the way, and you probably don't have a yes or no answer to them, but they're just kind of things to think about. And finally, thinking about continued engagement. Over half of people actually stop wearing their fitness tracker after 6 months. So think about how long you've been wearing it for. Has it been helping you over a long period of time? Has it skewed your view of fitness? So reflecting on all of those different pieces so that you can either improve your relationship to your fitness tracker or grow out of the need to wear it in the first place. So this research is key to understanding those deep motivators that lead us to rely on our extrinsic reward systems to continue a behavior. Because at the end of the day, you want to find as often as you can intrinsic motivation for your behaviors. And that's not always going to happen. And that's okay. But as much as you can, because that is what will continue engagement long term. So that was the video for today. I'm going to link the research in the description because she is a marketing professor, so it's an easy read. Unlike some other areas in academia that get super deep, she explains her research so well, and I highly recommend reading it because you may read it and have a whole other realization that I didn't have while reading it. I'm also gonna link my blog post on wearing an Apple Watch. And also, if you haven't already watched my video on motivation, I think that will also help out this conversation too. If you have any ideas of videos you would like me to make, so a topic that I talked about but you think I should talk about more, or a fitness myth you want me to debunk, feel free to put that in the comments. I would love to dig a little deeper into it. So thank you so much for listening and have a great rest of your day.